I stood at the podium, looking out at the nearly empty church. 12 people. That's all who came to say goodbye to Margaret Helen Thompson, a woman who had lived 87 years on this earth. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional cough and the whisper of autumn wind against stained glass windows. My grandmother had requested that family members speak at her funeral. The problem was, nobody wanted to. Not my father, who still bore the emotional scars from her constant criticism. Not my Aunt Susan, who hadn't spoken to her in 15 years after Grandma told her she was too stupid to raise children properly. Not even my cousin Mike, who Grandma had once locked in a closet for 3 hours because he spilled juice on her carpet. So there I was, 28 years old, staring at faces that held no grief, only obligation and barely concealed relief. The funeral director had given me encouraging nods, probably wondering why everyone looked like they were attending a mandatory work meeting rather than mourning a beloved matriarch. I cleared my throat and made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I was going to lie. Not just little white lies, but elaborate, beautiful fabrications that would give Margaret Thompson the send-off that her actual life had never earned her. Margaret Thompson, I began, my voice steadying with each word, was a woman who taught me that love sometimes comes disguised as tough lessons. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had been tough, all right, but there had been precious little love mixed in. I told them about the time she supposedly stayed up all night making soup when I was sick, carefully nursing me back to health. In reality, she had told my mother I was probably faking it and should go to school anyway. But as I spoke, I watched my father's expression soften slightly. Maybe he was remembering the mother he had wished she could have been. I invented stories about her secret acts of kindness, how she had allegedly donated to the local food bank every Christmas, always insisting on anonymity. How she had supposedly tutored struggling children in the neighborhood, never accepting payment. How she had quietly helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, asking for nothing in return. The truth was, Margaret Thompson had been the kind of woman who counted her change twice at the grocery store to make sure she wasn't being cheated out of a penny. She had called the police on neighborhood children for playing too loudly. She had once made my 8-year-old sister cry by telling her that her drawing looked like a monkey had done it with its feet. But as I continued weaving my fictional tapestry, something extraordinary happened. The small congregation began to relax. Shoulders that had been tense with memories of harsh words and cold shoulders began to ease. My Aunt Susan wiped away a tear, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in years. I spoke for nearly 20 minutes, crafting an elaborate myth of a woman who had hidden her kindness behind a stern exterior. I described a grandmother who had baked cookies for school fundraisers, who had secretly been proud of our accomplishments even when she couldn't bring herself to say so, who had loved us in her own complicated way. The beautiful lie grew with each sentence. I told them she had kept a journal where she wrote about how much she cherished family gatherings, even though she spent most actual gatherings criticizing everyone's appearance, life choices, and table manners. I claimed she had told me on her deathbed that her greatest regret was not being better at showing her love, when in fact her last words to me had been to complain about the hospital's inadequate pudding. As I concluded my fictional eulogy, something strange happened. People nodded in recognition, as if they were remembering a different woman entirely. My father stepped forward and hugged me, whispering "thank you" in my ear. Even cousin Mike seemed moved, perhaps finding comfort in the idea that somewhere beneath all that cruelty had been a heart that cared. Walking out of the church that day, I realized I had done something both terrible and necessary. I had rewritten history, not for Margaret Thompson's sake, but for ours. Sometimes the dead don't deserve our grief, but the living deserve our peace. Years later, family gatherings became easier. When someone mentioned Grandma, they would often reference one of my invented stories. The lie had become our truth, a shared fiction that allowed us to heal from the reality of who she had actually been. I never told anyone what I had done that day. Margaret Thompson had left behind a legacy of criticism and coldness, but in her death, she had inadvertently given me the chance to create something better, a story of redemption that existed only in the telling, but somehow that was enough.